Today I'm going to be talking to you about surrogacy, so the practice of paying a woman to carry a child for you, which is interestingly enough quite an old practice. Some would trace it all the way back to the Bible and probably before. It used to be that if a woman was infertile, her husband could seek out another woman and have a child with her, and that child would be legally the couple's. But today, with new reproductive technology, it is possible for such a childless couple to pay a woman to carry a child that is genetically theirs. So what I'm going to be talking about is mostly the latter practice, because it is that really made the industry explode. The ability for infertile couples or couples who for some reason did not want the woman to go through a pregnancy to have kids that are genetically theirs, and as we know, also gay men who want to have kids who are genetically theirs, or single people who want to have kids but don't have a partner or don't want to share custody for whatever reason. So why might feminists and other human rights activists have a problem with this industry? Let me start with the health risks. I'm not a medically trained person in any way, so I'm going to be giving sources down below, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail to make sure I don't get anything wrong, just a broad overview. So these kinds of pregnancies where commonly none of the genetic material is hers, these pregnancies are usually high risk for those women. The image that we get of surrogacy in the media is always, happy smiling couples, a happy smiling surrogate mom. We don't hear stories about women who, for example, in the process of surrogacy lose their own fertility, because that's how damaging it can be. Women who need a hysterectomy, women who have all kinds of complications before and during birth and after. And also the fact that there is a higher risk, of premature birth and complications for the fetus or for the child as well. Because one of the things we're going to be talking about is that at the center of surrogacy is a contract, and if there are complications, quite often this contract will state that the surrogate mother is at fault. She can be blamed for, let's say, a miscarriage, and quite often she will then be held accountable in terms of medical expenses. Quite often, if the infertility of the woman in the couple, if there is one, if she's the infertile one, they may require the eggs of another woman. So this would then also include egg donation. It's one thing if a woman subjects her own body to the risky fertility treatments, right, as we do with IVF, that of course countless women around the world are subjecting themselves to, which by the way has a much lower success rate than you'd probably think. But yeah, it's one thing if a woman who is childless and has a strong wish for children takes these risks. It's something else to ask another woman to do them. So there are women who are egg donors who they don't grow the child in their body, they grow eggs, they go through these fertility treatments. They're often poor college students because what the purchasing couples want is someone who is intelligent, but they also need them to be poor because egg donation is usually not charitable. So that can also harm those women's bodies. There are women who have nearly died from that, who have died from that, who have harmed their own fertility. Also that a couple that they often have never met can pick them out from a literal catalog, which begs more questions about designer babies, etc. But yeah, so her health is put at risk as well. Furthermore, what do we have? There is an intersection between the surrogacy industry and the breast milk industry. When the surrogate has given birth, she will produce milk for that baby. There are drugs to suppress that. There are various ways to suppress that, but depending on where it is or how fast they work, this can be quite painful, right? When women can't breastfeed, this hurts. And she may also be pumping and selling her breast milk to either the purchasing parents or to the international milk market. And yeah, there's probably a lot of health risks, a lot of painful moments that are not presented in media that I have right now omitted or that I'm not aware of. This list is probably much, much longer. I'm just giving you a few key facts. Risking fertility, risking health, even of the egg donor, the whole question about milk production, these are probably things you haven't heard of. That's why I'm telling you about them. And it's important to know that even if it's not commercial surrogacy but altruistic, so a woman having her mom, her sister, her daughter, her cousin, a good friend doing it for her, would you want to risk that woman's physical well-being, her health, possibly her life? Is your wish to have a child really more important than that? And we're going to be talking some more about altruism because it comes up in all these aspects. So moving on from the physical health risks, there are the psychological risks. Now again, I mentioned the history. Surrogacy historically involved prostitution, essentially. The psychological consequences of that, which is experienced by a number of women actually as paid rape, that is no longer the case, but it's still something that we should consider when we look at the full historic perspective. What's the problem today? Today, the psychological issues associated with surrogacy are more pernicious. They're not so obvious. It begins with an highly encouraged, if not enforced, association. So surrogate mothers are told by the agencies, by the clinics, by the purchasing parents that these children, multiple or one that are growing inside her, are not hers. She should, inside her own mind, and when she speaks, never refer to herself as a mother. The contract usually will not refer to her as such. Nobody will refer to her as such. She's often linguistically, invisibilized. No one should call her mother, just surrogate, which, some people have pointed out is quite dehumanizing language. But more than that, you're supposed to dissociate away from the process of motherhood that begins with pregnancy. And now there's some debate inside feminism, of course, around how pregnancy is romanticized and how not every mother has this magic bond with the baby. And we know there are abusive mothers, neglectful mothers. But let's say on average, the process of pregnancy begins an emotional bond between the mother and the child. Which is why, as much as I support the women's right to choose, and we'll talk more about abortion later, and why surrogacy actually violates my body, my choice. Obviously, miscarriages are traumatic, and some women do experience regret around abortions. And a lot of women experience this having to force themselves to not think this is my baby and to try and not form a bond as a pretty disturbing process, and one that they repeatedly fail at, because they're fighting an instinct that is, on the whole, usually natural. So some women do find aspects of the surrogacy process rewarding. That those are those who are actually in touch with the purchasing parents. Sometimes they're complete strangers. They'll never see each other or talk to each other. But some do. They will even come around, go to appointments with her, give her gifts, give her a lot of attention, call all the time and ask how she is. So there are a lot of women who almost get addicted to that level of attention, which usually brutally dissipates post-birth. Then nobody's calling, nobody cares, right? This is not really a genuine connection. This is the purchasing parents often wanting to have control over the situation, and we'll talk more about that again later. And sometimes these relationships can become abusive, and this is an issue again also in altruistic surrogacy, where a woman may be berated by her sister or, whatever family member is paying for it, that she's not doing it right, she's not taking enough care of herself. Sometimes there is a jealousy where the infertile woman envies the woman who is pregnant and who is able to become pregnant, and this can turn into her being abusive towards that woman. And this has, destroyed entire friendships and families before. We don't really hear about that in the media. And then finally, of course, that is sort of the heart of surrogacy. From the get-go, from the beginning, it's a plan to separate the mother and child. So a lot of these women, when they give birth, are not even permitted to see the child. They're not allowed to hold him or her, or maybe once. A lot of the time, these children are born through cesarean, which gives obviously the doctors a lot of control, the purchasing parents make a lot of the reproductive decisions, a lot of control, and then she'll literally never see the child. Sometimes she will not even be sent a picture, and this is again supposed to help her dissociate from her motherhood, essentially. And just make very clear to her that she has no rights, legally, socially, to that child at all. And I just want to say, we don't even do that to dogs or cats. There are laws around not taking away the puppies or the kittens from the dog or the cat mom until they reach a certain age. But we will take an infant away from its mother, its human mother, the moment after birth. Not even a little bit of skin contact, because, oh no, they might bond. Because what might this lead to? Custody battles. Even some of the earliest surrogacy babies had vicious custody battles being fought over them, where the surrogate mother did form a bond and did feel that this was her child and had to fight the purchasing parents. In court, and usually commonly losing in court. And again, this can even happen in altruistic cases. And there are a number of women who are struggling to speak out because there isn't really any money to be made in supporting them. There's not really a powerful lobby around them, who are saying, surrogacy traumatized me. Not only did it damage my body, or maybe it didn't, even just the psychological effect of 9 months with this growing life inside you and then having to give it up, having no rights to any contact, no visitation, not even photos. There are a lot of women who fall into depression over this. And yeah, we never hear about it, basically. And the problem is that you do not know how you're going to feel down the line. It is, again, this really complicated process around consent. We say my body, my choice because women might change their minds. There is not really a changing your mind when you're in a surrogacy contract, or if it's altruistic, you're still going to have some kind of agreement with that family and the psychological pressure of continuing that, because how dare you abort your sister's baby, right? There is no way of knowing beforehand if you're really going to be okay with that separation. Sometimes the surrogate, the first time around, it's okay. She gets photos sometimes and emails. It feels okay. And then the second time is completely traumatizing. There's no way of knowing that beforehand. And yeah, I do wonder how the purchasing parents can ethically square it with themselves that they might be causing this kind of trauma to a woman. I mean, one of the most painful things we talk about is the many, many times throughout history where, and it still happens, let's be fair, also in the adoption industry today, where children are taken away from their parents, who often do love them and do want to keep them. But in surrogacy, that's programmed into the thing. That's the core of the thing. Giving up the baby is what she's paid for. Now let's talk about discrimination and oppression in this context. Nearly always, surrogacy is something that's paid for by a wealthy couple or an individual, and it nearly always exploits an impoverished woman. So there used to be really big, booming commercial surrogacy industries in India, Nepal, Thailand, Mexico, Cambodia. And these countries all around the same time, something like 5 to 7 years ago, banned commercial surrogacy because they saw the harm done. They saw that there was reproductive tourism. I think Thailand banned it for foreign couples, but it's still legal for Thai couples. But yeah, it becomes most obvious when there are these, North American, Canadian, US, European couples coming to these poor countries and asking a brown woman and Asian woman to go ahead and carry the baby for you, the white baby, of course. That's when it's visually probably the most obvious that this is exploitation along class lines. This is a legacy of colonialism, etc. As these countries ban international commercial surrogacy, the market moves elsewhere, and now there's a growing market in Africa. And it's important to know that there is human trafficking into this industry, just like prostitution, and not when it's illegal, but actually when it's legal. Because there's such demand, they can't even meet it, same as with prostitution, by just exploiting poor women from literal slums. There is not enough poverty. They have to rely on human trafficking, and that is, again, individual men like husbands, pimping out their wives to the surrogacy clinic to support their gambling or their drug habit, or just to, improve the quality of the life of the family, maybe, but the person who has all the control is that husband. Or these, bigger crime networks. And the other motivation for surrogacy is usually extreme poverty. Extreme poverty. We're talking about, again, women in slums, women who have, some of whom are illiterate, that level of poverty. A lot of these women are already moms, which is significant to the clinics because they want to be sure that she is fertile. But yeah, she's literally trying to feed those kids. That's why she's doing surrogacy. And some of these are coming to the clinics in literally like half starved, looking for a regular meal and a warm bed every night. And this plays into the hands of the purchasing parents because in those countries, the industry is the cheapest. So you can pay the woman the least money. That's not to say that women who are surrogate mothers in, for example, the US get paid well. Actually, it's, I think, a lot less than a lot of people expect when you consider that it's a 24/7 job, a pregnancy, 24/7 job. A lot of these women in the US are working part-time because the surrogacy itself does not pay enough. Again, very reminiscent of prostitution. And for many, it is not a path out of poverty. They have to do several cycles to lift themselves, or they just never do. if the money is mishandled, let's say again by like an abusive husband. Many of us heard about Ukraine. Ukraine has a booming commercial surrogacy industry where wealthy couples from all over the world go and exploit poor women. And of course, now with Russia attacking Ukraine and with the war waging, there was a lot of debate about the legal aspects of how do you get the babies that are already born out of the country. So these couples like worrying about their babies, getting them out, but the woman who literally just gave birth, who's probably not in a good state to flee from literal war, is getting left behind. Or these other issues where the Ukrainian surrogate mother wants to flee into a neighboring country, but in that country the surrogacy adoption process that would enable the couple to take the child to Great Britain, wherever, is not legal. So she would violate her contract. There's a lot of insanity attached to this, and I want to mention one more aspect that I find really, really disgusting and a really dangerous way to head in society. So there are these celebrity couples, like by now it's quite common, right? I mean, the list of famous people who've done this, mostly heterosexual, but some gay couples or individuals who don't even have a partner, who are probably going to be outsourcing the childcare to nannies. Yeah, the list of celebrities who've done this is long. And what are their reasons? We often picture the purchasing parents as these people who suffered really long who are infertile. That's not necessarily true. So these reports of these celebrity couples who just travel the globe and they just don't have time to have sex during the woman's fertile window. So we're not talking about desperation. We're talking about my schedule is too busy to have sex, but I really want a child. Other times, we have these actresses telling us that they don't want to damage their looks. We know how tricky it is for actresses to get jobs when they're pregnant or to continue a job when their character is not pregnant, and that needs to be hidden on camera. So they're like, yeah, it's going to harm my job chances. So I think another woman should be pregnant in my stead. Also, I don't want any damage to my body. I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to have stretch marks because my body is my capital. I need that to be, looking fit and not post-birth. Yeah, do you think these people who are so caught up in their careers they can't be arsed with sex or pregnancy, do you think that they're gonna then, when the child arrives, change their schedule, spend all the time on the child, or maybe they'll outsource the bulk of the work to their nannies and to tutors? Because I think it's gonna be the latter, and I really have no compassion for these people. I really don't. Interestingly enough, I'll be giving sources for all of this. There is some research that indicates that a wealth gap actually also exists in many altruistic surrogacy cases, where the woman isn't paid, but the purchasers, they still have to pay money to the clinic, a lawyer to set up a contract. There's still a contract there, and if the wealthier couple, that is friends or relatives of the surrogate mother, if any kind of lawsuit occurs, be it custody or questions around medical decisions, then they have a better chance of winning in court because they can afford the expensive lawyers. And really, the argument that surrogacy is some kind of expression of bodily autonomy and empowerment and belongs in the my body, my choice category, that is maybe the most perverse aspect of all. My assessment of the evidence is that surrogacy is the more than 9 month, usually at least 1 year, signing away of your bodily autonomy to various degrees. So somehow the bodily autonomy of women is giving up that bodily autonomy to other people. Let me be more specific. What kind of questions are we talking about? There are the reproductive decisions. That begins with the invasive and detailed medical exams that happen before she's even, going through the process of artificial fertilization, insemination, etc. Medical exams to see if she's fit to be a surrogate mother. She has to have her entire body probed to see if she's healthy enough, because obviously you don't want to put money into a woman, into a process where something might go wrong. Furthermore, the surrogate mother has to give up her right to medical confidentiality to the purchases because they're permitted to know everything, her entire history, her entire mental health history, whatever's in there. That's part of it. That's necessary. Then you have the fertility treatments that, again, we know are quite risky to the body. What if she halfway sees that she has complications and she wants to quit? A lot of the time, she's then not going to be paid. That's all going to be in the contract. Or the pay is so minimal, she is, economically motivated to continue, even though it's harming her. Then you have prenatal screening. which is quite relevant here because, again, you wouldn't invest money and get a child that's ill or something. And also, many of these parents have very clear ideas what they want. Let's say they definitely want a girl or definitely want a boy, or they want to have one boy, one girl. So there's quite a number of sex-selective abortions, which, by the way, can go wrong, can cause dangerous bleeding in the mother, etc. And that's not up to her. There is a contract that decides whether that can take place, and quite often stipulates that she has to be subjected to these screenings and to sex-selective abortions that feminists in other places decry, right? Because it's often girls who are aborted. This way, the countries that already have a way higher men to women ratio can make that even worse. We're all against that, but in surrogacy, it's basically not talked about. Also, of course, I mentioned women are usually subjected to cesareans because it gives them the highest level of control to the doctors and, again, the purchasing parents. And let's say she doesn't want a cesarean. There are many good reasons why you would want a vaginal birth. Well, it's not up to you. It's in a contract. And again, this is also a problem in altruistic surrogacy, not just commercial, even altruistic. I mean, if you be like, there's two good friends and one of them's infertile and the other one decides, yes, I will be your surrogate. When these decisions come up, you need some kind of process to decide who decides. And if you leave that up to chance, just kind of hope you're going to be of the same mind when the time comes around to pick, for example, the type of delivery. You're putting yourselves at a lot of risk, so that's why that's very rare. There are also contracts which stipulate rules around her diet. For example, if the purchasing parents want her to eat vegan, even though she's not a vegan, how much sport she may do to avoid things that could cause miscarriage. The same with hobbies, if any of these are considered risky. Sometimes there's even rules about the type of music she's allowed to listen to. There are rules around getting piercings or hair dyeing, whatever could possibly have any effect on the child. Whether she's allowed to have sex with her partner or outside a relationship or not. And sometimes even where she might live, if the surrogate parents say this or that neighborhood is too dangerous, you're literally not allowed to move during your pregnancy. You need to stay in this area that we've deemed safe for you. I mean, what bodily autonomy to have other people decide that for you? There are sometimes travel restrictions, not too rarely. This is not just, in India. I mean, this is where you have the most extreme cases of women literally forced to live in these surrogacy clinics. They sometimes can basically not leave the premises. They're monitored 24/7. That's the most extreme kind. But even in contracts in supposedly progressive places like California, they can say you're not allowed to leave the state because you're carrying our child. And if you go to some place that we don't deem safe or whatever, where we don't have any control over it, then you're violating the contract. You're risking harm to our child. Yeah, but these clinics where women are kept sometimes, when they're literally kept in the clinic, which happens, to the poorest of women in the poorest of countries, you can regulate everything, right? Their movement, which is usually limited a lot, and right, they're supposed to gain weight. Sometimes they pay the woman based on the weight of the infant, more being better, of course. And yeah, she may be found at fault or not paid if she has a miscarriage. This is why, again, they limit women's movement, sometimes even control the way that she urinates, just to avoid that outcome. And the most extreme case that I came across here that was researched by the surrogacy expert Jennifer Lal was an example of a woman whose contract stipulated that if she had an accident or for some reason fell into a coma, it would not be her partner who decides whether her life should be prolonged technologically, but it would be the purchasers who are the genetic parents of the baby she's carrying who would decide whether to turn off her life support or not. I hope it's clear now why the my body, my choice argument in the surrogacy contract is just such a perverse reversal of reality. Finally, we got the subject of children's rights. A number of people have argued that surrogacy is both the commodification of a woman and reducing her to a womb, which I strongly agree with, but it's also baby trafficking because she's not being paid for the pregnancy, because if she did then decide to abort or keep the child herself, then she wouldn't be paid. She's paid to hand the child over. The child is the product, and there are many, many more moments where we can see that the child is a product in this context, because we know that there is a rejection of so-called damaged goods. So we have a lot of cases, accumulating cases of disabled kids being rejected by the purchasing parents, kids who have the wrong sex, the sex that wasn't desired, being abandoned if they want one child, but they have twins, which with these artificial fertilization is quite common. They have twins or triplets, then they might only take 1 or 2 children, only as many as they ordered, and leave the other one. There are a number of premature babies who have been rejected as well, or babies rejected because low weight or too small, or their skin color was too dark. And sometimes these babies are then adopted by the surrogate mother. Others end up in orphanages, and there are examples of some children who were literally like found in the street, dumped in the street. We talk about how people do this when they purchase puppies and cats, where they think, oh yeah, I really want that, but then the type of animal goes out of fashion, or it's more hassle than they expected and they dump it, and that's horrific. But in the context of surrogacy, that is happening to literal newborns. And somehow we're not talking about this really as an international community. What other rights of the child are being violated? Well, we know from the increasing number of children who are products of sperm donation how they talk about identity issues, wanting to know who their father is. In the surrogacy context, it might be as complicated as 3 different mothers. So the purchasing mother, who may be genetically related if she's the egg donor, but if there is an egg donor, then that's the genetic mother. And the surrogate mother is the one who carries the child. So it might be as complex as having 3 different mothers and having sometimes no blood relation to the woman who raises you. Even in the process of sperm donation, where at least you do come out of your mother, there are now adults who say, I think this practice should not be permitted. The harm it causes to a lot of families, the internal struggles, the alienation, the identity crisis is too much. I don't have a fully formed opinion on sperm donation. I'm still looking into it. But if that is a problem, now consider surrogacy, where the woman who grew you 9 months, I don't know the full research on how much the child inside the womb bonds with the mother. I would assume it probably does. I mean, it can hear her voice. If she's under stress or upset, that impacts. Like, we know that when women are pregnant, when they're in traumatizing situations, violent, dangerous situations, that has impact on the kids. So it would not surprise me that the separation for that infant could also be traumatic. I think that's not far-fetched. Here's where you can see some of the limits of my research. This is still an issue I'm looking into, where I don't understand all the aspects of it. I remember reading on Wikipedia that Wikipedia held that children born through surrogacy did not have worse mental health outcomes than other kids. Or maybe compared to kids who were adopted, and not necessarily worse than others. But we're also in a situation where this technology is a little bit too new, that there is yet a generation of kids who are out there as activists. The sperm donated kids are, and if it makes sense to me that if there are a lot of critics in that group, that there would be in the future for surrogacy. Children who go out to find the woman who gave birth to them. And finally, while we heard about all this intense scrutiny and screening of the surrogate mother, there is no comparable screening of buyers. We know that there's a lot of things wrong with adoption, but at the very least, when it's regulated, there is some kind of screening of the adopting family. Who are they? Do they have a safe home to offer? What are their records financially, mental health? Do they have any crimes in their history, etc.? No such thing for surrogacy. The only requirement you need is to have money. And you can do things like have as many children as you like. So these extreme cases of these purchasing parents getting addicted to the process and having like dozens and dozens and dozens of kids to the point that they can't possibly take care of them, and again has to hire a bunch of nannies. That might be more extreme, but still, you wouldn't be permitted to adopt 30 children, but you can absolutely purchase 30 kids through surrogacy and have full custody of all of them. So there are these creepy stories of people who believe in their own genetic superiority. So even like white supremacists doing the stuff with reproductive technology. I'm not aware of a specific surrogacy case where this also happens, but it wouldn't surprise me if these scandals are going to come out in the next few years, because again, this is what we've seen through the years emerge with the sperm donation, actually. And finally, I mean, you can have any individual, including someone with a history of crimes, purchasing as many children, infants, as they want. So you can have a single man who is a convicted child rapist purchasing infants without any limits. And this is, for example, based on the laws in New York, for example, which again we presume would be progressive, laws that were pushed through during the pandemic while everyone was busy with other subjects, so there was no real resistance mounted. And now these surrogacy clinics are springing up everywhere and anyone can purchase. Actually, I do have a case of a surrogacy adoption that brings all these different child rights abuses together. A number of people might know the case of baby Gammy. So Gammy was a boy infant born to a Thai surrogate hired by an Australian couple. The surrogate mother had twins, and the boy was sick. He was born with Down syndrome, and he had a congenital heart problem, so he was critically ill from birth. And his genetic parents rejected him and only took a sister, and the surrogate mother adopted her child. But as the media reported, this woman was so poor that she could not afford the healthcare that the little boy needed, and it became an international scandal. But somehow this story just gets worse and worse because as the media investigated, they found out that the man in this couple was a convicted child abuser who was caught sexually molesting young girls in the 80s. And this man claimed that he had gotten successful therapy for this and he no longer felt the urge to traumatize kids. So they were allowed to keep custody of the child. So yeah, that's one famous case. How many went under the radar? We know that most sexually violent men, whether they target adults or minors or both, are not ever caught, are not ever sentenced. So while they might get through the adoption process, the surrogacy process is even easier. It really just takes money. That's it. When I say that a single man, this child rapist, could purchase kids, people don't want to hear that. They really, really don't. They're like, oh, that's too extreme. Oh, that can't be common. Well, it shouldn't happen at all. Even if you support legal surrogacy, would you not fight tooth and nail to say that there has to be some regulation on who can buy? The only thing that people are upset about is that some countries ban gay couples and only allow straight couples. That's the final part that I want to talk about, sort of bringing everything together. The surrogacy industry is a global multi-billion-dollar business that has a lobby, and they're the ones putting the images out of the happy couples, and they love taking some marginalized community like chronically ill people, infertile people, or gay men, and putting them at the forefront, because then any attack on surrogacy is an attack on those people, which completely ignores that the average couple, purchases is white, wealthy, and straight. But even if they weren't, let's say it was only black, gay, disabled men using surrogacy, that still wouldn't make it okay. Using these groups as human shields to exploit a gigantic group of marginalized women is just disgusting. And you should really, really question a lot of what you see in the media, because this industry has really, really captured the public perception on this issue. And just as much as those of us who are critical of prostitution say sex is not a human right, you just don't have right to the inside of another person's body ever, no matter who you are, even if you're disabled or whatever, it doesn't matter. Same with babies. Babies are not a human right. You have a right that the state may not sterilize you against your will. But you do not have a right to risk another woman's life, her physical and mental well-being, and to put your genetic child inside her and then separate them. Like, you just do not have that right, no matter how marginalized you are. Absolutely, there should be, and there is, lots of compassion for childless couples. I think if a woman wants to subject her own body to these risky medical procedures, I think she should be fully informed about how the success rate is actually incredibly low. My understanding is that 3 out of 4 cases of especially, slightly older women trying to have babies do not succeed. But it's one thing to do risky things with your own body, but with other people, a number of infertile people have spoken out and said, not in my name. And that it takes a certain level of entitlement. Like, I have a right to a child at whatever the cost. What is the solution then to alleviate the suffering of those people, which is very real? I don't need to explain that because I think that's the consensus. Well, a lot of people say they should adopt, right? Gay men should just adopt. And I, again, don't have a fully formed opinion on adoption. The more I learn about that, it's also an industry. There's also human trafficking, child trafficking, fake orphans, abuse of adopted children, abandonment of adopted children that don't meet the requirements of the adopting parents. And there is a lot of issues. I'm not sure what to do with genuinely orphaned kids or kids who really, really had to be removed from abusive families. I don't know that for sure. But one thing I would definitely endorse is a more communal form of childcare. I mean, this is not so rare in the gay community where a lesbian has a child or a lesbian couple has a child, and they may also have gay male friends who are co-parenting. So these co-parenting arrangements, because I mean, what do we talk about all the time as feminists? That problem with the nuclear family model is sort of that the mother is usually burdened with housework, childcare, and probably also a part-time job, and that she may need support during the pregnancy and after to carry this burden. And if it was more communal, if there was, let's say, a grandmother in the house helping out, or a childless couple next door who really loves to babysit, that this is better for everyone involved. This is a form of being involved in a child's life, of bonding with a child. You can also tutor kids. You can become a sports coach, an art teacher, whatever. There are various ways to have children in your life. There are so many single moms or couples who would love to have other people support them. And there are advantages to a child having more than one caretaker and more than one person that they can trust. If they have a problem, they need someone to talk to. Of course, this is not really what a lot of these people who lose surrogacy want, because they want to be genetically related to the child. And this is, again, not necessarily to disparage wanting a child that's genetically yours. I think that while it is perverted in patriarchy in the sense that, I mean, all the control of women's sexuality to ensure male parentage, right, historically is cruel and everything, I'm not saying it's like gross to want to have your own genetic child. That is not gross. I think it's gross to do that at any cost. And I think that that's the right. It's not about disparaging that wish, but there is also just the fact, same with prostitution and the fact that some people struggle to find sexual partners. Most Johns do not, but, you know, some people really do. That is sad. That deserves compassion, and we should try and make it possible for people to meet people, to have sex or co-parent, whatever. But it's not a right, and we just have to face the fact that for some people, it's not going to happen. There are lots of things that don't happen for a lot of people. We have to be clear on what's a human right and what is we will try and help you fulfill your potential, but sometimes it's not going to work out. And there's just this obsession with technology. If technology is going to enable us to do anything, anyone can have a child, anyone can have a sex robot, anyone can live forever. I mean, there's this whole transhumanistic aspect to the surrogacy project, really, that some of the supporters believe in. Like, just push the boundaries. What else are we going to? We're going to have men get pregnant. The maternal mortality rate in the US, especially of Black women, I mean, we have problems right here, right now. We have a way that's worked for millions of years of how to have kids, how to reproduce. That thankfully is becoming less and less deadly, but there's more to do. But we're talking about, you know, surrogacy for everyone, artificial wombs. And I'm really mad when people push any criticism of these technologies into the conservative corner and say, oh, you're saying everyone needs to have a heterosexual nuclear family. I just talked about how we can have alternative models without, you know, all this exploitative, dangerous technology that's much less effective than it pretends to be. I can be against, you know, doctors and scientists playing God without endorsing, you know, men literally owning their women and their children as property. Like, there has to be a healthy middle ground or a third way. I don't accept this dichotomy. And yeah, and I think we should all be talking about this more. So thank you for listening. Leave your thoughts down below. I'm sure there was a lot that I omitted. This is probably a really long thing and not an actual TLDR, but yeah, the subject deserves it. It's that important. I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger in the coming years as surrogacy becomes normalized, unless we do something to stop it.